about the Seder today. Rav Soloveitchik always used to spend time before Rosh Hashanah to speak about Kiyas, and before Yom Kippur to speak about the Seder Avodah, and before Pesach he used to spend time. And with that, he used to cover 45 blot a year, with the taking off the time. He spoke very quickly. He only gave shir 2 days a week. He spoke very quickly, had a lot to say. So one of the comments that he would often say over was, from the Hagada to the Ma'aseh Nisim Hagada, the Nesivos put out a siddur that's called Derech HaChaim Siddur. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes him every other page, Derech HaChaim Siddur. And in the siddur he has the Hagada, because years ago the meaning was that everybody said the Hagada after Shabbos HaGadol, after Mincha on Shabbos HaGadol. So that section, so he quotes different answers given by the Rishonim, difficult answers, and then he gives his own answer. So he says, he asks the question, how come we don't recite a bracha before we say Birchas Hamazon? It's a mitzvah in the Torah to recite Birchas Hamazon. It's a mitzvah to recite Kiddush. How come we don't recite a bracha before we say Kiddush? Let's say someone's having pizza. So he says, Hamotzi, or whatever bracha you say on the pizza. So there's a mitzvah midrabanan to say Hamotzi. Mitzvah midrabanan, you drink a cup of coffee, you say Shahakol. Why don't we say Asher Kiddushanu b'msas mitzvana levarach ala eichlim? Why don't we recite a bracha before we say Birchas Hanenin? So the answer is, whenever the mitzvah itself is fulfilled in the form of a bracha, they didn't feel it necessary to introduce an additional bracha in advance. So then the Siddur goes one step further. He says that on Pesach night, we fulfill the mitzvah of Sid B'Tzias B'Tzorim within the framework of the 4 brachas. Kiddush al Hayayin, Asher Ge'alanu al Hayayin, Birchas Hamazon al Hayayin, and Birchas Hashir. So since the whole mitzvah of Sid B'Tzias B'Tzorim is being fulfilled within the framework of brachas, they didn't feel it necessary to introduce a Birchas HaMitzvah in addition to all of these brachas. So Rav Soloveitchik would add on a little bit more. So he would add on, there is a Gemara in Saita where the Gemara quotes different Tanaim and Amoraim were asked by the students, what did they do to be zecher to live to such an old age? So one of them was a kind, he says he was always careful that before duchening, he would say a bracha, Shekadishani b'Kiddush Shel Aaron, Tzivanu l'Barachas HaMisol b'Yahavo. So the Meiri poses a question, that's a din. You're supposed to recite a Birchas HaMitzvah before you perform a mitzvah. So that for that you zecher to Arichas Yom. Arichas Yom, all the other Amaran, they say some Midas Chasidus that he was careful about. He went out of his way to do something. But over here, that's halacha. So the Meiri gives a fancy answer. He says, even if the person with duchen, let's say sometimes here in the neighborhood, and broyers, not the way it used to be. Years ago, broyers used to have 35 kohanim standing on the bima. So, and a lot of times the Aguda minyan didn't have any kohanim on Yom Tovim. So they would ask one of the kohanim, after in broyers they duchen in shachris also, on Yom Tov, shachris and musaf. So the Kohen didn't want to daven in the Aguda because they're only going to duchen in Musaf. So he would duchen in Shachris and Broyes, and then he would come to the Aguda to duchen in Musaf. So the Mogan Avram has a machlekes achronim, whether you recite a bracha if you're duchening in a second minyan. Let's say there's only one Kohen, and at the end on Eretz Yisrael, where they duchen every day. And at this Kohen davens at the 6 o'clock minyan. He's retired. He has all the time in the world. And then at the end of the 6 o'clock minyan, he takes off his talus and 12 wants to go home. The people from the second minyan say, do us a favor, we have no kohen. Stay here in Duchen. So he's going to stay for the second minyan. He's not obligated, not min haTorah, not midirabbanan. Usually the chiyuv to Duchen sets in if the tzibur requests, amar lahem. If the tzibur requests a bracha, then the kohen is obligated to Duchen. Our meaning is that all year long, the tzibur doesn't request the bracha for whatever reason. So they never requested, so the Kohanim are not mechuyev. But over here, if the second tzibur requests of the Kohen he should stay, so the Gemara says, not mechuyev, not min haTorah, not midirabbanan. Even though he already duchen by shachris, he's mechuyev to duchen by musaf, that's only midirabbanan. Not mechuyev to duchen more than once a day. it says in the Mishnah, Mechuyev Teduchen, Shachris and Musaf, that's only made the Rabban. And our Torah is not Mechuyev Teduchen more than once a day. And another minion also not Mechuyev Teduchen. So the Magen Avraham has a Machlekes Achreinim. What's the din if the Kohen does Duchen a second time in the day where there is no Takan Schal for a different minion? Does it make sense that he should say the bracha? So as a Machlekes Achreinim. So the Meiri interprets that that's what the Gemara is talking about. The Gemara is talking on the Sasi Kapai Beli Bracha. You always said the bracha, even if I would be duchening at the second minion, I'm not Mechuyev, not Menater, not Midirabbanan. That's questionable. That's the Machlekes the Magen Avraham, Machlekes Achreinim. The Meiri interprets that's what the Gemara meant. So in that Gemara, the Netziv has in the Shurim that he delivered in Volozhin. They have 3 volumes, Meroi Mesoda, big volumes of the Shurim that he gave. You can see how quickly they went. They used to learn a Blat Gemara day because he tells you when he started Brochus, what day, and when he started Shabbos, and when he started Erev. And so you see that they went a Blat a day. They went quickly. So on that daf in Saita, the Netziv raises the same question. He didn't have a Meiri on Saita. Why is that? What was the Midas Chasidus over here? It didn't require that you have to inside a Birchasam. So the Netziv answers no, because the Takan Chamim was you have to do it in the middle of Chazaras Hashatz. So since it's in the middle of the mitzvah itself is not in the form of a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a bracha to Abbas Adam Yirecha Hashem Yishmerecha, but it's in the middle of the Shemona Esrei, which are brachas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So since this mitzvah of duchening is fulfilled in the middle of the framework of the brachas of the Shemona Esrei, so Mikra didn't, they never made a takana at all. So what was the Midas Chasidus? He said the bracha of Atola. There never was such a takana to recite Shekut Shan B'Kedush Hasa Shalarim. If there is such a Nusach HaBracha, the Rama has the last page in Hilchas Trumas. If a person eats Truma, a Kohen, eats Truma, or even Chalos Chutz Lords, he should say a bracha, Shekut Shan B'Kedush Hasa Shalarim, Tzivano Al Achilas Truma. But for Duchening, there never was a bracha, a Birchas HaMitzvah, because it's within the framework of the brachas of the Shemona Esrei. So Mikra then not Mechuyev to Duchen. What was the bracha all about? So he says it's based on a passage in the Zohar that whenever you want to give a bracha to a Basav Adam, Derech Eretz dictates that you give a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in advance. So they quote that in the Matei Ephraim, Anuchas Lashon Yom Kippur. Many have the minig, many have the practice to give a bracha to their children every Leil Shabbos. And even those that don't have that minig, but the Erev Yom Kippur, that's a more universal minig to say a bracha for the children. It's printed in the Machzor on Erev Yom Kippur. So they quote from the Zohar that since you're going to give a bracha to a Basav Adam, Derech Eretz dictates you should first say a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what should you say? So it says in Nachman, you say Baruch Hashem D'Olam Amelei V'Einei Baruch Hashem Tzor Shechen Yerushalayim Haluka. Say a pasuk in Tarach that says a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this Amoira, his practice was he said Baruch Atah Al-Kein Melech Olam Shekut Shan B'Kedush Hasa Shalarim Tzivano. That's how we saw the Yahavot. That's a question. Imam said a bracha, so it should be a bracha of Atolim. The Netziv doesn't deal with that. He just said because of that Zohar, that the Derech Eretz dictates to give a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that was the Midas Chasidus that this Amoira had. He would always say a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu before he would recite the Birchas Kahan. And then the Netziv, in the Meroi Mesoda, refers you to the Rabbeinu Yoina on brachas in the back, Rabbeinu Yoina on the Rif, Talmid Rabbeinu Yoina on the first page in brachas. That the Rabbeinu Yoina quotes a tshuva from Rav Hai Gaon, that if a person daven Ma'ariv early and he has to repeat Kriya Shema again later on after Tzeis HaKochavim, because he wasn't Yotzei with the first Kriya Shema, so then he should say, recite a bracha before he says Kriya Shema. The second time he should say a bracha but if he davens Ma'ariv after Tzeis HaKochavim, then he doesn't have to say the bracha. So Rabbi Yehuda says he doesn't understand. It doesn't make sense. Why do you only say a bracha, Birchas HaMitzvah and Kriya Shema? If you daven early and you're going to repeat Kriya Shema, what if you daven in Ma'ariv Bizman? So you don't have to repeat the Kriya Shema. So once you say a bracha there, Shekadashon Satzvanu, Likruas HaShema. So the Rabbeinu Yonah doesn't understand it. So the Netziv writes in the Mirah Mitzvah, that's the pshat. And so eventually he used to say that over. He used to say over this from the Ma'aseh Nisim Hagada, from the Nesivus Hagada. Then on Pesach night you don't say Bechas HaMitzvah because the Sipi says is being fulfilled within the form of the 4 brachas, within the Mizgeret, within the framework of the 4 brachas alakos, the Kiddush, Asher Alanu, Bechas HaMazon, and Bechas HaShir. That's how the Mishnah calls it. And by Duchening, the mitzvah of Duchening is being fulfilled within the form, within the framework of the brachas of the Chazaras Hashatz. And the Kriya Shema, if you done Ma'ariv Bizman, then Kriya Shema is being fulfilled within the form of the Bechas Kriya Shema. So there's no need for another bracha. But if you daven Ma'ariv early, you have to repeat Kriya Shema, then Rabbi Goim is of the opinion that you got to say Bechas HaMitzvah at that time. So that she used to say over a lot of other things from the Nesivus, from the Hagada, on what the Psukim are indicating. Biad Chazaka, Shenemar, what's the Shenemar? What do you need a raya for? So he has a lot there. The Nesivus has a lot. So he used to say over a lot of those ideas. So that she would say over also. There is a machlekes hatanaim on the pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. It says you should eat the korban Pesach. So the Gemara understands an additional level of interpretation. Pashup pshat laman tiska, meaning you should remember Yitzias Mitzrayim. Eat korban Pesach once a year, every year, in order that you shouldn't forget Yitzias Mitzrayim. So the Torah Shabbat Peh has an additional level of interpretation that we understand the word tiskar as taskir. Zoyin Chaf Resh sometimes means to remember, and sometimes means to declare. Like Zachas Yom Shabbos Lakacha means to recite Kiddush. Zachas Shas Amalek, it says Lo Sishkach Arei B'lei Bama Manim B'Kaim Zachas Zachas B'Peh. So here also, Torah Shabbat Peh understands in addition to Pshut Roshon Mikra, the Matizka Semtzaim Koi Mechayecha refers to Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim that we fulfill every day. What does that call? Call is usually a riboy. So there's a machlokes hatanaim whether call is marbel havili moisa Mashiach, that this mitzvah will apply even in moisa Mashiach. Even though the pasuk sounds, the pasuk in Navi sounds like when Mashiach will come, we will no longer talk about Yitzias Mitzrayim. Lo yamar al Chai Hashem shehela b'nei Yisrael mi'eretz Mitzrayim al Chai Hashem she'evi eschem mikol ha'arotz. We'll speak about kibbutz goliath. So the pasuk pshat sounds like we won't talk anymore about Yitzias Mitzrayim. So that Tana says it doesn't mean that. It means the Ikar will be the Gula HaSida. Yitzias Mitzrayim will be a little thing, and the more important will be the Gula HaSida. And the other Tana disagrees. He says no, that the Mos HaMashiach, the mitzvah will not apply. It's only Haru Ashor. The mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim every day is only Haru Ashor for a few thousand years. That's famous B'Shem Rab Chaim, that the tzlach has the kasha. Hakaram didn't count the mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim. He counts the mitzvah of Sipi Yitzias Mitzrayim on Pesach night. How come he doesn't count the mitzvah of Zechiras Mitzrayim every day? So there are many good answers. Chaim gave, one of the answers he gave was that we assume that Gam, what does it say? Kol Yimechayecha, Kol is Marbalelu, so Tezchir B'Yom Balayla. So then it means Limos HaMashiach mitzvah will not apply. So it's only Haru Ashor. And the Rambam writes in the 14 guiding principles in the first half of the Sefer HaMitzvahs that whatever is only Haru Ashor is not considered a mitzvah. Mitzvah only Adaba HaNoeg L'Deres, and that's why it's not counted in the Minyan HaMitzvahs. So the question is, if we assume like that the Zechir Bayom Balayla and Mos HaMashiach there won't be a Chiyuv, so every night of the year there's a mitzvah of Zechir Yitzias Mitzrayim. So what's Manishtana, what's different at Pesach night? There's a mitzvah of Sipi Yitzias night. The same thing as every other night. Why do you duplicate the same mitzvah? So eventually used to say over the name of Rab Chaim that there were 3 nafkaminas, then he added on another 2. It boils down basically the 3 nafkaminas. So one is the mitzvah every night is only Zechiras, Bekitzer, just to mention briefly. The last pasuk, Anir Shem Elkech Masher Tzeischem Yeretz Mitzrayim. Then with the Rabbanan, you add on, you should say Makas B'Cheres and Kriyas Yamsuf. Okay, that's Bryce and Tosefta, and it's quoted in the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Rishonim quoted that midrabanan you should mention also makas becheres and kriyas yamsuf. But min haTorah, all you need is zechira b'kitz. But sipur, l'sapar means to tell kalam arba l'sapar is a meshubach. You should tell it barichas. That's one difference. The second difference is that sipur tziyasman is supposed to be l'sapar. You got to tell the mincha. You should tell someone else. And if his children are not there, so he should tell his wife. And if not his wife, he should tell shalom zelazeh. People should talk to each other. Sipur tziyasman should be preferably fulfilled by telling this story to someone else. They write about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the last Rebbe who passed away, that he was by his nature, he was very bashful. And he spoke so much in public that was against his whole personality. And when on Pesach night, when he had the Seder, he never had any children. His wife was there and his mother-in-law was there. Then after the mother-in-law passed away, so he said to his wife, after I passed away, people were wishing they would be able to be by the Rebbe's Seder. He made the Seder by himself. No one else was there. Not to be understood. But the mitzvah l'chatchila b'shleimusa is l'sapar acher. If there's no one else there, then you tell to yourself. But more correct is to have other people. So that's a second difference. The sapar means l'sapar b'acher, and sipur tziyas mitzrayim. And zechiras just means lahaskir, to mention tziyas mitzrayim. And then the third difference is that all you don't just say Ani Hashem Elokechem, should say Se'eschem Eretz Zam Le'os Lachem Lelakim. That's all. On Pesach night, it should be Derech She'elo Tshuva regarding the mitzvah Salayla. That's why you say in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, needs to say V'chol Ha'alazah Nachman Basad Tzli Tzolek HaMevushal Ha'alazah Kula Tzli, because you only eat Rosh Ha'Kol Kippur has to be broiled. Then you say halala zeh kula matzah, halala zeh mora. You speak about then what's matbilim. What is the mitzvah of matbilim? Mesubin. Mesubin is a mitzvah midrabanan to eat behaseba. What's that mitzvah? So Rav Soloveitcher used to point out that there are two mitzvahs that sound similar, but they're really different. One is benatar, one is midrabanan. Chol davar chayvadim liris hatz mekiluhu yatzim mitzrayim. Everyone on Pesach night had difficult mitzvah to fulfill. Everyone's supposed to have the attitude as if we just left Mitzrayim tonight, and have the attitude either the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says Hariyona v'neinu 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 b'shabodim ayinu the fire Mitzrayim. You have to have this sensation. You have to have the mindset as if we just left Mitzrayim, and if HaKadosh Baruch Hu either the HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mitzrayim, we'd still be mishabodim the fire Mitzrayim. How can it be? All the slaves were emancipated all over the world. They all rebelled and they all were sent out to freedom. So why would we still be slaves? That's a difficult mitzvah to fulfill. That's the mitzvah min haTorah. The mitzvah min derabanan is not that difficult. The Rambam calls the chayvanim laharas hasatzma, to demonstrate that he is a ben chorin. How does one fulfill the mitzvah min derabanan? So the Rambam writes in Hilchas Chametz and Matzah by eating behaseba and by drinking arba kaisis. Arba kaisis of wine. They don't give the slaves l'chaim. They give slaves the orange juice, or they give them water, or something healthy. But the intoxicating beverages, that's only for b'nei chayrim. So the Rambam says that the mesubin and the arba kaisis, that's what the Mevorshim asks. How come we don't ask a question about arba kaisis? The answer is we do ask that. The question of mesubin is the same as the question of arba kaisis. That's mitzvah chayvanam, the mitzvah midrabanan. B'chol davar chayvanam laharas hatzmo. But the question is, matbilim. What mitzvah is there in matbilim? What mitzvah are you talking about? Rav Soloveitcher had two suggestions on the assumption that is the din. It's supposed to be derech she'ela tshuva regarding the mitzvah salayla. So the Bana Migdash they had on Korban Pesach, then you have matzah mora, then you have misubin, includes also arba kaisis in it. And what's the matbilim? So there is a machlokes hatanoim in the Mishnah in Arba Pesachim. What is charosis all about? So one opinion in the Gemara is charosis only mishum kippah. There's a worm. There are kosher worms and non-kosher worms. So the kippah, for some reason or another, is a kosher worm. That's the question. Why? So Tosfos discusses it. When are the worms mutar b'achila? So the worm is kosher, but it's unhealthy to have a live worm crawling around in your stomach when you're alive. Everybody's going to have worms crawling around in and out. But while you're alive, it's not healthy. So they used to dip the mar into the charoisa mishum kippah in order to kill the worm. Why isn't there an Isser on Shabbos? Let's say Pesach falls on Shabbos. This year it falls on Matzoy Shabbos, but every so often it falls on Shabbos. On Yontif, you're permitted to do shchitim shumach on nefesh, but on Shabbos you're not allowed to kill an animal. So somehow there's no Isser of netilas and shama on the worm. Okay, for some reason or another, there's no Isser netilas and shama. So the question, so that's one opinion, that the whole purpose of charosis is for health reasons, that you don't want to have live worms crawling around in your stomach, and if you know that your mora doesn't have any worms, then you don't need the charosis. The Rambam does not accept that opinion. The Rambam says that the Gemara has it's a mitzvah. Machlokes hatanaim. The Rambam paskin like that Tana. No, it's a mitzvah midirabanan. Why? It's either zechel adam, a zechel tapuach, a zechel tit. So because the zechel adam, that's Tosfos quotes the Yerushalmi, and the Bavli has two opinions whether zechel tit, a zechel tapuach. So the Gemara said, therefore, if it's zechel tit, so it should be thick like cement. It shouldn't be too liquidy, and it should be zechel tapuach, tachas tapuach araticha. So the Gemara says sarch lekuhuye, like tapuach. What is a tapuach? A tapuach. And Marhi b'tapuch means an apple. So Rav Soloveitchik, I think, used to point out, I think he pointed it out, maybe others pointed out, that apples don't have a sharp flavor. So the Gemara said, Tzorch l'kuhuye, the charosis has to have a sharp flavor to it, zechel tapuch. So Tosfos in the end of Tainis, I think, is a Tosfos on an Amud base. The second or the third daf in the end of Tainus, I think, that says tapuch in biblical Hebrew means an esrog. So esrog, or a citrus fruit, orange, has a sharp flavor to it, a tangy flavor, not like apples. So that's tzorch l'kuhuye, zechel tapuch, and tzorch l'smucha should be thick, zechel tit, and then it says zechel dam, we should pour in red wine, unless you live in a country where there's going to be an alila saddam, so you don't look for trouble, so you don't pour in the red wine. So Rav Soloveitchik said he's not sure what the matbilim, what mitzvah are we asking about there? They're supposed to have shelas utshuvas regarding the mitzvah salala. What mitzvah is it? The mitzvah of charoises, midirabanan, there's a mitzvah of charoises, or is it the mitzvah of karpas? The Rambam writes, he tells you all the dinim of the Seder Perikhes, and then he writes when you take karpas, he dipped it into charoises. He doesn't dip karpas into salt water. Rambam has three dips. He says you dip the karpas into charoises, then you dip the matzah into the charoises, then you dip the moror into the charoises. Three. So that's the question. Why we say alala shtei pamim, shalosh pamim? They don't give any explanation. According to the Rambam, you dip all three times in charoises. So the Rambam says when you dip the karpas into the charoises, you eat the karpas, you have to say borei pri hadama, because you didn't say hamotzi yet. Hamotzi is going to come way later, and the Rambam says you eat a kazais of karpas. Why do you need a kazais of karpas? The Gemara says the whole purpose of karpas kadisha yishal al tinokos. What's going on? Why don't we just said kiddush? Why don't we wash and start the meal? Why are we postponing the meal for later? So the Hagos Maimonides was one of the Talmid of the Maharam Rutenberg. When the government put the Maharam Rutenberg in prison in order to hold up the Jewish community for the ransom, so the Rosh was a wealthy man. He was going to put up half the money. He was going to raise the rest of the money from the Jewish community. So the Maharam told him that you're not allowed to. Ain't put him such from yes today to him. You're not allowed to put up all the money. He said not during his lifetime, not after he dies. They shouldn't ransom him. So they didn't have anything. He wasn't a criminal. The government didn't want to punish him. He didn't do anything wrong. They just wanted to hold up the community for money. So so they allowed the students to come every day. So the Rosh and the Mordechai and the Hagos Maimonides were all together at the same time. Talmidim, the Maharam Rutenberg, is to come every time. So So that Gros Maimonides quotes, he heard from the Maharam Rutenberg, that maybe that word kazayis is a mistake, because when the Rambam says later, you say the Hagada, then you say hamotzi, you eat matzah, then you eat maror. He says eat a kazayis matzah, then he never said that you need a kazayis of maror. And it's not a question. The Mishnah says beferish. There are 5 vegetables that are acceptable for maror, and ochel kazayis mikulam yotza. So it says beferish in Mishnah you need a kazayis. So how come the Rambam didn't say you need a kazayis? So the Maharam Rutenberg suggests maybe it's a misprint, that the word kazayis really is said by maror, and somehow it floated up when they were setting the typo. When days of the Maharam Rutenberg, there was no typesetters. When the scribe was writing it over, so he made a mistake and he put the kazayis, instead of being later by maror, they put it earlier by the karpas. You don't need kazayis by karpas. So Rav Soloveitchik said he doesn't know why the Rambam didn't say you need a kazayis by the maror, but he thought once the Chachamim instituted karpas for the reason they shishul atinok, then they were masakin it as a mitzvah sachila. So it's a mitzvah sachila. So you need a kazayis. With the Rabbanan, you need a kazayis. And I thought you don't need the whole thing, but with the Rabbanan, there masakin is a mitzvah sachila. So maybe that's what we say. Halala zeh shtei pamim. Either we're talking about the mitzvah of charoises. We don't understand why shtei pamim should be sholosh pamim according to the Rambam, but it's a mitzvah of charoises, or perhaps it's referring to the mitzvah of karpas. With the Rabbanan, there's a mitzvah sachila.
But isn't the din of derech she'elu tshuva is only regarding the mitzvah halayla? Meaning the sipur itself doesn't need to be derech she'elu tshuva?
The sipur should be in the form of she'elu tshuva, mitzvah halayla, yeah.
I mean, what about like the story? Is there any kiyum for a kid to ask what happened during the shibud, and then for the father to give an answer, and then for the kid to ask what happened during Makas Dam, and then for the father to give an answer? Is that a kiyum of she'elu tshuva, or it's only regarding the mitzvah?
Only the mitzvah halayla, yeah. That's what we assume. Only on the mitzvah halayla. Yeah.
Don't we say in the Fir Kashas, we say Einmal Karpas in Salzwasser, Einmal Mar in Charosis.
Yeah.
So
the Rambam didn't have that.
I know, I'm just saying, but
he didn't speak Yiddish, he didn't have that version. Okay. But he has 3 times. Why doesn't he dip the Korban Pesach into the Charoises also? So the Korban Pesach has to be eaten b'fnei atzmai. And the Ram had a different gears in the Gemara regarding Hillel. Hillel HaYikarach, we have Pesach Matzah Mar. All 3 together, Pesach Matzah Mar. And the Yerushalmi Chala is beferish like that. There is Pesach Matzah Umar. And the Rambam says not so. The Korban Pesach is eaten by itself only Matzah Mar. The difference between Hillel and Chachamim is whether you eat Matzah separately, Mar separately, you eat Matzah Mar together. But nobody holds. That's what the Rambam sheet did. Nobody holds. There is Pesach Matzah Umar. The Mefarshim on Yerushalmi, on the page, they point out that Yerushalmi Chala is against the Rambam. Yeah. So those are the differences between Zechiris Tzias time every night and Sipi Tzias Mitzrayim on Pesach night. Yeah. Who asked the questions? So the Rambam has, the Mishnah says, V'kana bein shoel. When you take all the food off of the table, then the child asks Manashtan. That's what we assume. So the Rambam writes, you take away the kaira from the one who's saying the Hagada. You fill up the second cup of wine. What is the bein shoel? We always say Manashtana. So the Rambam writes differently. So Rabbi Soloveitchik used to give the shir in Yiddish. He said the child asks whatever silly questions he wants to ask. And then it says the one who's leading, the grandfather, the one who's leading the Sipi Tzias Mitzrayim, says Manashtana Alayla. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said it could be that some translate like this in English. Manashtana, how? Not a question. In what way is tonight, or why is today different from any other way? We say it's the fear kashas. It's not a kasha, it's a shaila. A kasha is a contradiction. There's no kasha over here, it's the fear shailas. But it could be that kana bein shoel, the child asks whatever he wants to ask. The Kori Hagada Omer, and the one who's saying the Hagada says Manashtana Lala. It could be it's a statement. look how unusual tonight is. A declaration, not a question, but rather a declaration. There are some Haggadas where they translate it like that in English. Look how different tonight is from all the other nights.
Then how is he Mekayim the din of She'u Tshuva? If you hold that that's a declaration,
on the assumption that it's not, yeah, on the assumption that it's not. We assume the kind of ben shoel manishtan. That's what the child says. But the Rambam has like this. It could be that it's not. It could be that it's how different tonight is. Yeah, there is a question. Taisus quotes Yerushalmi. The Rambam quotes Yerushalmi. You're not permitted to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. So there are different opinions when does the Issa eating matzah begin. Some, I think the Balamor holds it only begins after Chatzais. And others assume it begins in the morning, and others assume the night before Erev Pesach. Leil Yudalet, it's already also to eat matzah. So Chaim Soloveitchik thought that you can't say like that, because say, Sheb'chol ha'leilos anochlim chametzu matzah. When is B'chol ha'leilos, including last night? Leil Yudalet, anochlim chametzu matzah. So you are permitted to eat matzah, leil b'dikas chametz. Only not allowed to eat matzah either starting in the morning or starting in the afternoon. But leil, that's a shaila. Is there any issa in eating matzah on Leil Yudalet this year? Pesach is going to be Shabbos, so you have to have lechem mishnah for Friday night. So the issa chametz only begins Erev Pesach in the morning, 2 hours before Chatzai. So what about Leil Ased? Is it permissible? You have tons of matzahs. Is it permissible to use matzah? So that's you say Rab Chaim held based on the Manishtana. You see that it's mutter. Okay. Rabbi Black put out every couple of years, whenever Pesach falls out on Erev Shabbos, he always puts out a thorough essay about what the dinim are. So he quotes those who disagree. He likes to be a machmor always. So he quotes those who say that you're not permitted to eat matzah leil b'dikas chametz. Okay, that's Rab Chaim thought. Yeah, what's the story with matzah? So the pasuk describes matzah as lechem oni. So the word oni has different levels of interpretation. So one of the and we accept all of them. So one interpretation, lechem oni, prat matzah ashira. If it's matzah ashira, it's not acceptable. So what's matzah ashira? So the Gemara says 4 kinds of matzah ashira. If you needed you have the Pesach tikkah flour, and instead of kneading it with water, you kneaded it with cholov. Obviously, the person can't afford to have a fleshik meal. He's going to have milchiks Pesach night. Cholov, the Gemara said, not allowed to have milchik bread. So the Gemara said, if you make a meshuna, if you make a different shape, so you'll know that it's milchik. It has an unusual shape. So if you use shemen, yayin, dvasha, cholov, one of those 4 mashkim. So the Rambam understands that that's dafka those 4. If you have matzahs made with mei peres, the Rambam holds you can use it for the seder. The only thing you're not allowed to use is matzah shira is the 4 mashkim. Why only the 4 mashkim? What's the yuchas like yain shemet vash b'chol? So the Aruch HaShulchan says he doesn't understand. Must be some explanation. Doesn't know. So the Abnei Nezer was a super genius. This Rav Soloveitchik did not say over. Rav Soloveitchik did not say this over. Rav Soloveitchik say over a lot of Abnei Nezer. Sometimes he remembered b'shem Mama, sometimes he didn't remember. But a lot of times he would say mamish word for word from the Abnei Nezer. A whole Rambam, step by step, paragraph by paragraph, he would say. So the Abnei Nezer has the following. There is a machlokes hatanoim in the Mishnayos. Is it then maga megvatzasa kamaga bekula? Let's say this is a steak, and I'm tameh, and I touch one corner of the steak, so it's considered one big piece of steak, even though I didn't touch the end over there. Maga megvatzasa kamaga bekula, the whole steak is tameh. That's because it grows like that. The steak is one unit. What if they slice the steak? So the first piece of steak is mekabel tumah. Second piece of steak may be mekabel tumah from the first piece of steak. You have to go to those dinim, but the next piece of steak will not be mekabel tumah. So what's the din if you have, let's say, a long Italian bread, and I touch one end of the bread? That it doesn't grow like that. The bread doesn't grow from the ground like that. That's artificially. I made it into one unit. So the din is, once you make it into one big loaf of bread, so the mashke is mechaber. So the zamachloikas hatanoim is the, if would you say magam and v'sosik magam v'kulo? Let's say if you use mei peris, and you didn't use any water at all, you only used mei peris in the bread. Would you say it's one unit magam v'sosik magam v'kuloi, and therefore they will be tamei also? Or another nafkamina ledina will be, is it mitzdaref yachad to be mechuyev and challah? Because if you have an isa that has less than mem gimel beitzim v'chomish beitzim, so it's not mechuyev and afrashas challah. So what if you made a lisha with mei peris? Is it considered mechuba yachad? So you have a sheared syrup of mem gimel beitzim. That's what the Malecha Shloimei Mishnayos, it's one of the Svardim from centuries ago. So the Melecha Shloimei writes on the first page in Mishnayos Chala that the word Chala is gematria of mem gimel, because that's how many mem gimel beitzim. Chamish beitza is the sheer isas midbar, and that's the sheer for Chala. He says midbar mem gimel beitzim chamish beitza. So the Yerushalmi makes these two tolis at the zeh. How does the Rambam paskin is a little unclear. So the Abnezer first, in order to give his pshat, the Yishuv on the Shar Rambam, why is Matzah Shira is only Yain Shem and Dvash Cholov? So he thinks that the Rambam paskins that the only thing that's mitzaref are the Zayim Mashkin. You have any, that's Machlokes HaTanoim, whether any mashka other than the Zayim Mashkin, or Mei Peris, whether they're mechaber or not. So he thinks that the Rambam paskins that if you only have Mei Peris, you wouldn't say Magam. The Rambam doesn't say take a stand on either of the two topics. He's guessing. So he thinks based on Kololi Hapsak that the Rambam would probably paskin that Mei Peris is not mitzaref. So if the Mei Peris are not mitzaref, the flour together to be considered one unit, that is Magam Sasa Magam Bekuloi, it's one unit that you have Mem Gimel Beitza and Chamish Beitza. So then, if it's not mitzaref, then it itself is not mitzaref either to the isa. So let's say I have a shmura matzah, and I shmir on a lot of jam on the shmura matzah. So is that a problem on matzah shira? No. I put jam on top of the matzah. In order that it should be matzah shira, has to be that when you baked it, you made it into matzah, that our shira is in it. So that's what the Abnezer says. If you hold that the only mashkim that are mitzaref, the flour together, that they are mitzaref to the isa or the zayin mashkim, so then we understand the Rambam very well. One of the zayin mashkim is dam. So if you're going to shmir, if you're going to put in dam in the matzah, so it's going to be treif, so you can't eat it. So cross that out. Another two of the zayin mashkim is mayim and tal. So do is water. So that's matzah niyah, that's lechamoni, that's good. So three of them, you can't say that mayim and do and tal are not acceptable. That's normal matzah. And dam is going to be treif. So the only four that are left are yain, shem, and vash v'cholav. These are from the zayin mashkim. They are mitzaref, all of the flour together. And when you bake them with the matzah, it's mitzaref to be considered matzah shira. If you're going to shmir on jam after it's baked, it's not called matzah shira. It may be a different problem. The Gemara says that the Hezbollah in the Gemara, Rav Solesh used to say this, that the behemoths eat also. The goyim eat food. Everybody has to eat in order to remain alive. So how can you have a mitzvah of achila? It's a secular, it's a universal secular thing that behemoths have to eat. So if you're going to eat, whenever there's a mitzvah achila, like matzah, like maror, like korbanos, truma, whatever, so you have to eat it separately. If you eat a dvar mitzvah together with a dvar hashus, also dvar hashus and mevatel dvar mitzvah. That's the basis of the machlokes Hillel and the Chachamim Are you supposed to have the matzah and the maror together? They're supposed to be separate. So the Chachamim are of the opinion they have to eat separately because each mitzvah is separate. So matzah is separate, maror is separate. So if you're going to eat matzah with maror, each one is in competition with the other. So it's considered from the perspective of matzah, the maror is a secular thing. From the perspective of maror, the matzah is not a mitzvah. So mitzvah is mevatel zu azu. That's the Lashon of Gemara. The Chacham hold mitzvah is mevatel zu. So you're eating matzah together with maror. So each one of them, you're not yotze the mitzvah because you ate it with something that's not part of that mitzvah. It's a different mitzvah. Hillel says, no, mitzvahs are not mevatel zu azu. If you have a dvar harshus but a dvar mitzvah, that'll be mevatel. So that's what Tosfos discusses. How much jam they have to put on the matzah to say that it's osid dvar harshus mevatel dvar mitzvah. You're going to have a lot of jam, then there will be mevatel. Just have a little jam and nishgefela. That wouldn't be mevatel. So that's Inyanei. He was a genius. He had Talmidim who tried to imitate him, but you can't imitate a genius. Either you have it or you don't have it. So the Talmidim are not at all like the Inyanei. Maror bizman hazeh, the Gemara says it's only midrabanan because the pasuk only speaks about eating maror at the time that you have korban pesach. When there's no korban pesach, so the mitzvah of maror is only midrabanan. So Rav Soloveitchik would say over every year, machlokes the Rambam and Tosfos. What about bizman hamigdash? They are bringing a korban pesach, but I have to be tomei or b'derech rechoika, so I'm unable to eat korban pesach. So do you say that maror bizman hamigdash is also only the Rabbanan, unless you're eating it together with a korban pesach? Or do you say no? Maror is an independent mitzvah. The Rambam writes that maror bizman hazeh the Rabbanan. Maror doesn't exist as an independent mitzvah. He said it's not counted as one of the Taryag mitzvahs. It's the way to fulfill the mitzvah of korban pesach b'shlei musa. Al matzah samram yochluhu. You should eat matzah and maror together with the korban pesach. Matzah has two kiyum. Matzah is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. Bizman hazeh the matzah is deraisa. The machlokes in the Gemara. One opinion in the Gemara, matzah bizman hazeh is the Rabbanan. So matzah and maror are both only hechsher with the pischa. Then matzah wouldn't exist as a separate mitzvah either. Matzah would only be what the Gemara calls hechsher with the pischa. You enhance the mitzvah of achidas korban pesach by eating matzah and maror. So the Rambam is of the opinion that matzah is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma and also hechsher with the pischa, but maror is only hechsher with the pischa. It's a detail, a prat within the mitzvah of korban pesach to be mekayim the mitzvah b'shlei musa. And Tosfos says not so. The Gemara says, "Tomei b'derech rechoka can eat bohu de'eino echal aval echalhu b'matzah u'b'maror." So that's the girsa that we have. Echalhu b'matzah maror. Someone who can't eat korban pesach bizman habayis has to eat matzah and maror separately. And the other girsa, aval echalhu b'matzah. They don't have echalhu b'maror. Echalhu b'matzah because maror does not exist as a separate mitzvah. Then in the bracha asher geolana v'golas havasena, the second cup of wine, so we say, Ken Hashem. So the Mishnah presents it as if it's a machlokes Reb Tarfon and Reb Akiva. What's the nusach habracha? So Reb Tarfon said the bracha Igana alala zalechal b'matzah umar. And Rabbi Akiva added on, Ken Hashem Ken Yagir Adam and Agar Lamachem Abayim Kasem. Shani added on more. So the Rambam writes both in the Mishnah Torah as well as in the Pirush HaMishnayos. It's not a machlokes Reb Tarfon and Reb Akiva. Reb Tarfon was older than Reb Akiva. He lived Bizman Habayis. He lived through the Churban. He lived after the Bizman Habayis. Reb Akiva was mainly functioning after. Reb Akiva added on. In the days of Reb Tarfon, Bizman Hamikdash, they said, Pesach matzah u'maror. Amen. That was the end of the bracha. And Rabbi Akiva, who lived after the Churban Habayis, they changed the nusach habracha, not lechal by Pesach matzah, lechal by matzah u'maror. And then you add on, Kein Hashem Hakein Yagir L'Me'adim L'Gar Machem Habayim L'Kaseinu L'Shalom Smechem Evin Yerech L'Sosem Ba'avei L'Secha L'Nachal Sham and Azochem L'Maptrachem Asher Yagir Damam Al Ker Mizbachacha L'Iratzon. So it's a hoidoah. The bracha has two parts. It's a hoidoah אשר גאלנו בכל הסבסנים ממצרים הגענו הלילה זה הרידויה, then כן השם יגיענו למועדים, that's הבקשה של הבא. So that's called the bracha arucha. When you have two themes in the bracha, it has to be chosemes bebaruch. So the days of the Akiva, after the Churban Abayis, they made it into a bracha arucha because they added on the bakasha ala haba. The days of Reb Tarfon, he lived as man Abayis. So it only was a bracha b'haydoi. We thank you. But, all right, so that's how the Rambam, Rav Soloveitch should point out, the Rambam has both in the Pirush HaMishnayos and in the Mishnah Torah has that. But the Lashon that we say is very strange. She'agia damam al kim mizbachacha l'rat. So what kind of yagia damam? It's a very strange expression. She said yizarek damam, tzrikas adam. So Rav Soloveitch suggested that there's a machlokas hatanoim, whether the Korban Pesach it says you do zrika achas keneged ha'yisod. So that's a Mishnah in Zam B'Koyma. Yeah, there was Zam B'Koyma. So there's a machlokas hatanoim whether bizrika or b'shvicha. If it's bizrika means mirachok. You throw one zrika of dam on the mizbeach, and if it's b'shvicha, means you hold it in a cup in a klishoris and you pour it like this. So that's a machlokes hatanoim. How we're going to pass? We'll see losid labai. So we don't want to take a stand. So we say she'agia damama and became mizbeach. However, whether they're going to do shvicha or zrika remains to be seen. We'll have to see. We'll ask the shayla then when the new Beis Hamikdash will be built. Okay, these are some of the many comments that Rav Soloveitch had on the same. Very good.
Thanks, Rebbe.
Very good.